Hello, I'm Kevin Berger, author of Atheism Untenable. I'm explicitly irreligious and agnostic. I don't need apologetics because there's no need to defend an argument that I don't make, and I can't logically shift the burden of proof for a claim I don't make. If you imply otherwise, you'll remove all doubt that you're intellectually dishonest and have no credibility. This is Justified Nonetheless. Please like, subscribe, share, and ring that notifications bell.
A recurring theme when I have conversation with people about nonbelief is a conflation with doxastic dispositions and epistemic dispositions. Epistemology, the scientific discipline that concerns itself with knowledge and by extension justification and claims of knowledge, is a far more well-known aspect of philosophy. Doxastics, on the other hand, is something with which fewer people are familiar. Doxastics is the scientific discipline that is concerned with belief and belief formation. These two disciplines are distinct but related in much the same way as are sociology and anthropology. Yes, there is considerable overlap between the two of them. Indeed, knowledge is a subset of belief. However, the distinction is important because whereas justification is a prerequisite for knowledge under the canonical definition of knowledge as justified true belief, justification is not required for the mere presence of belief. In fact, that reality is precisely why knowledge is a subset of belief. It is for that reason that when one explains, I don't believe X because I don't have evidence or good reason or whatever the case may be, they've already abandoned the topic of doxastics, which is what I'm actually contesting, in favor of epistemology. Justification and veracity, the truth of the claim, fall outside the purview of doxastics. Because we know that belief is involuntary, and because we know that people hold beliefs that are unjustified, and because we know that people hold beliefs that are untrue, as soon as someone mentions these things in a conversation about the presence of belief within the context of doxastics and doxastic dispositions, one has already made a category error. One has already committed a logical fallacy. So let's talk about pure doxastics and doxastic dispositions. How not to substantiate an absence of belief. Let's talk about doxastic dispositions. Belief, BSP, is the propositional attitude canonically expressible as SA that P, such that S is aware of P, where S designates the subject, A designates the attitude, P designates the proposition, and the attitude is such that the subject finds the truth value of P to be greater than the false value of P. Disbelief, or belief in the negation, BS not P, is the propositional attitude expressible as SA that P, such that S is aware of P, and the attitude is such that the truth value of P is less than the false value of P. And then nonbelief, or absence of belief, whatever you want to use, is not BSP. And you could add on here not BS not P. And that's the hypothetical propositional attitude expressible as SA that P, such that S is aware of P, and the attitude is such that the truth value of P is equal to the false value of P. These doxastic dispositions are independent of epistemic dispositions that speak to what the subject knows to be true. I don't believe P is as much of a propositional attitude toward P as are I believe P is true and I believe P is untrue, and that by extension not P is true. All right, so if we look at all propositions, we'll let A equal awareness of the proposition. We then have some propositions that the subject is aware of, which would be ASP, and we have some that the subject is not aware of, which would be not ASP. So, for example, babies would fall into the not ASP category. Rocks would fall into the not ASP category. People who have never been introduced to the concept of a God would fall into the not ASP category. It is intrinsically incoherent to speak of those subjects in terms of belief because it isn't applicable in the first place. Those would be innocence, or in a broader category, including the rocks, what I call pristine nescience of the proposition. Those would be entities that aren't even capable of being aware of them in the first place. So, if we drill down, including the propositions of which the subject is aware, now we can talk coherently about belief. And now we have three categories. We have BSP, which is belief in the proposition. We have BS not P, which is disbelief in the proposition or belief in the negation. And then we would have not BSP, and again you could add on and not BS not P, and that will be non-belief or absence of belief or unbelief or whatever it is that you want to call that. I like to use the term epistemicism, but hey, you do you. The important thing to take into consideration here is that one is hypothetical because we have no actual empirical evidence to support an absence of belief. What we have are people's self-reports, and those self-reports are invariably based on a lack of justification, which speaks to the epistemic disposition of agnosticism. It does not and cannot speak to whether or not belief is present. To attempt to subsume innocence, the not ASP, into non-belief or absence of belief results in a violation of the principle of non-contradiction, as this would entail that the subject is somehow both aware of and not aware of the proposition. Furthermore, this results in the commission of a variety of logical fallacies. So Mott and Bailey, within the context of atheism, if the discussion is about self-identifying atheists, the attempted subsumption of innocence makes for a position that is seemingly easier to defend. A red herring, within the context of atheism, if the discussion is about self-identifying atheists, the dispositions of those who are unaware of the proposition and who do not self-identify as atheists is irrelevant. And it proves too much. Within the context of atheism, if a doxastic disposition is arbitrarily assigned to subjects with regard to the proposed existence of a deity by default, then one can arbitrarily assign subject doxastic dispositions to any proposition, including those that result in absurdities. Doxastic dispositions are not the same thing as epistemic dispositions. Premise 1. If subjects' lives are affected by causation beyond their control, then even in a compatibilistic model, literal, unrestricted free will does not exist. Premise 2. If literal, unrestricted free will does not exist, then doxastic involuntarism is true. Premise 3. If doxastic involuntarism is true, then the absence of belief is an ought and not necessarily an is. Premise 4. If the absence of belief is an ought but not necessarily an is, then propositional logic is only applicable to the epistemic ought, which is the descriptive disposition. It's not applicable to the doxastic is, which is the normative disposition. Premise 5. Subjects' lives are affected by causation beyond their control. Conclusion: therefore, literal unrestriction free will does not exist. Conclusion 2. Therefore, doxastic involuntarism is true. Conclusion 3. Therefore, propositional logic is only applicable to the epistemic ought, which is the descriptive disposition. It is not applicable to the doxastic is, which is the normative disposition. So again, propositional logic can only tell us what beliefs are justified. It can tell us what a subject should believe. It cannot tell us what a subject does believe. The arguments, I don't have enough evidence, I don't have good reason, the only logical position, etc., can be rebutted with one simple question. Does anyone anywhere ever believe anything without justification? Because the answer to that question is obviously affirmative, then the presumption of an absence of belief has no epistemic warrant. The existence of self-identifying, non-resistant atheists is illustrative of the reality of doxastic involuntarism and highlights another issue. If one wishes to argue that it is possible to believe or not believe a proposition through sheer force of will, either 1. Self-identifying non-resistant atheists are dishonest in the expression of their doxastic disposition, or 2. Self-identifying non-resistant atheists are mistaken in their own doxastic disposition. In the case of the first scenario, in which one asserts that self-identifying non-resistant atheists are dishonest in their expression of their doxastic disposition, one would infer the burden of proof for the claim that it is in fact the case, and it would likely involve the commission of a variant of an omniscience fallacy, as the claimant's argument would then be that they know the cognitive state of those expressing non-resistance than those individuals themselves. In the case of the latter scenario, where one asserts that self-identifying non-resistant atheists are mistaken in their own doxastic disposition, this necessarily raises the question as how the claimant knows that they're not mistaken about their own doxastic disposition. In summary, to discuss subjects who are unaware of a proposition in terms of belief, disbelief, or absence of the same is intrinsically incoherent, and as such, the attempted subsumption of innocence into atheism is unwarranted. Doxastic involuntarism is true, rendering the absence of belief an ought rather than necessarily an is. Because the absence of belief is an ought, but not necessarily an is, its presumption is unwarranted. Because both the attempted subsumption of innocence and the presumption of absence of belief are unwarranted, the notion of the absence of belief, as distinct from disbelief, as the default state or null hypothesis in terms of doxastics, is also unwarranted. Because the notion of absence of belief as a default state is unwarranted, the absence of belief must be substantiated in some other way. As evidenced here, it is intrinsically incoherent to discuss subjects who have not been presented with a proposition in terms of belief, disbelief, or the alleged lack thereof, because doxastic dispositions are the attitudes that people have about propositions, and no such attitude can logically arise until after the subject is aware of the claim. Further, not believing claims without justification, while ideal, isn't guaranteed because we don't have the choice of what we do and we don't believe. So the notion of non-belief as being the default disposition is also intrinsically incoherent. Sure, we can be uncertain, unconvinced, unsure. We can suspend judgment. However, that's just an admission that we don't know, because belief is unjustified, which falls outside the purview of doxastics, and is a category error, and a logical fallacy. Are we starting to understand this now? Here's the long and the short of it. Because belief is involuntary, because belief is formed by a myriad of factors beyond evidence and sound reasoning that are outside of our control, because people do hold beliefs that are completely unjustified, because belief can be held without conscious awareness. When a person says that they don't believe either of a pair of binary claims, they are precluding even the possibility that they hold a subconscious belief that is unjustified due to having been involuntarily formed by any number of factors that they can't control, and such a preclusion has not been justified. It's merely presumed. And if that can be believed without justification, then so can anything else. This is one of the many reasons why the concept of an absence of belief doesn't stand up to any serious scrutiny.